Hi there everyone, my name is Forrest, and welcome back to the series System Hardening for Beginners. In this course, we're going to be talking a little bit about the built-in security solutions that are available for both Mac OS and Windows workstations. But before we go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of it, let's just recap what we talked about last time. So remember, in the last module, we talked about user accounts. In this, we had a little bit of a demo of how we can add a user account in PowerShell using that CLI, that command line interface, and as well how we can use the add user to the settings and using that the GUI, the graphical user interface. Now, as well, if you went ahead and did the lab there, you got to have some hands-on experience disabling, enabling, and as well adding new accounts, so on and so forth there. The main intent behind this is giving you some sprinkles of other areas you may want to leverage, such as PowerShell, or even if you just want to have that user account and understanding, you can go ahead and use that graphical user interface, right? Now, in this module, we're going to be, again, talking about the built-in security solutions. So, what exactly that means is we're going to be talking about what comes, quote-unquote, out of the box. And really, that can be a lot of different things. So let's go ahead and just dive immediately in. So what does a built-in solution mean? Essentially, again, that's that out-of-the-box solution, meaning it comes with any new device and it's not anything that you as a user or you as a consumer have to additionally download by navigating to a site, right? If you're a old school computer user, you may have had to do this with like Norton, or you may have had to do this with McAfee, any of those other products where you had to pay a standard fee annually, downloaded it to your computer, and that was your antivirus, right? Consumer products, we're not talking about things like CrowdStrike or Cortex XDR, or even Defender for Endpoint that are enterprise levels, right? We're strictly talking about what comes out of the box for these solutions. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're always going to be fully configured, but for the most part, both Mac OS and Windows OS now do give pretty comprehensive solutions. As well, it's really that base level configured whenever you boot up, right? Whenever we're talking about that, it means that this is effectively largely done without you needing to do anything. And really that's beneficial for most users, right? Not everybody's a technical user. You even watching this course, you might not be a technical user, but you want to be secure, right? So this typically goes ahead and means it's something that's good enough, right? It's not going to be something that gets you compromised. It's not some weak solution. It's good enough for 90% of the population out there, and it works largely for that. As well, I will say in most paid-for solutions, they're base level configured as well, right? You're paying a premium to go ahead and have the best capability without you needing to go ahead and do anything with it. That's really the main selling point, because otherwise you can even build your own solution, right? But it's that convenience of not having to build a solution, not having to manage a solution, and that it takes care of almost everything for you, right? Many of these enterprise solutions, by the way, they'll tend to have like that centralized management console where a IT administrator or a security administrator will go ahead and log into and control all of the devices throughout that management console. One key thing though, just because these are built in, that does not mean they're foolproof, right? This is not an end-all be-all solution. They oftentimes will need complementary controls, other solutions. If you've ever heard of that phrase, defense in depth, we're talking a little bit about that here, but you want to have complementary controls that work hand in hand with it, right? And typically, even then, it's not foolproof. In cybersecurity, we have this term 0 days. Those are basically the attacks that have not previously been observed. They have not been able to be found through any of the testing that the various vendors have done, anything else like that. But now suddenly, someone figured out how to exploit it, right? So, not anything in tech is going to be fail-proof, right? You need to be comprehensive, you need to be aware, and you also need to use as many complementary controls as possible. I want to emphasize though, don't go ahead and download 7 different antiviruses on your computer because of that, right? They don't often work hand in hand. The key emphasis on this is complementary, right? They work together. But the key thing, it's just very similar to like a door for your home, right? You don't just leave it open because somebody could potentially bust it down. You want to go ahead and use these controls even though they're not foolproof there. Now, one other key thing about these built-in solutions, right? They're good enough for most of the users. We kind of talked about that a little bit, but let's just elaborate. So most users and consumers who are using computers for any of their personal use, right? They won't need to go ahead and purchase an additional security solution. If you're in the US, you probably often will get a deal for like 1 year free of McAfee antivirus or something like that when buying a computer, right? But most of the times, if you're a consumer or user using this for your personal computer, you won't need to purchase an additional security solution on top of the operating system solution at this point. Now, if you're a pretty heavy computer user and were using those maybe 10 years ago, you might be feeling some pain in your heart right now, right? And that's very accurate. About 10 years ago, the case was extremely different, right? Windows security, just as a whole concept, was extremely lackluster. They did not have an adequate defender solution. Mac OS, Apple, the security of it wasn't really that it was far better, but it was more obscure. Less people were using Mac devices, so it was very easy to go ahead and say, we're not spending the time to develop an attack on these Mac users, right? There was less payoff for these bad actors to do and leverage that. Now, as well, it was always wise to have something like a McAfee, Norton, Kaspersky. The case is just drastically different at this point. So again, most 90% of people will be able to just use the Windows Defender or the Mac OS-based solutions there. And again, you still will require updating and patching, right? Now, this goes into, again, it's not the end-all solution. It deals with that same concept, but this is really important to break out. So whenever you're updating or patching or anything else like that, you always have to go ahead and make sure you're getting, well, really the most up-to-date information unless you're worried about something breaking, right? Main reason behind this, in a lot of the security solutions especially, these updates go ahead and enable for what we call content packages or content information, anything like that, right? And so basically, breaking it down at a very high level, and some people will probably be screaming saying that's way too high level, right? But a content update is something that's thousands on millions of billions of different information, these indicators, what bad actors go ahead and use, right? And it's compiled into this small little file. And this file gets fed into your endpoint solution, your antivirus, right? And basically it looks for stuff like that. Now often, if you're not going ahead and updating your security solutions, at some point you're not going to be getting those content updates, right? It just doesn't work based on the version that you have anymore. So it's always crucial to continuously update these as much as possible. Right now, I personally have to update my machine, so after I record this, I'll be going ahead and updating my computer just to make sure that I have everything as up-to-date and safe as possible. Now, main thing, we talked a lot about security solutions in that, but everything, you heard me say it, my Windows machine, right? Everything needs to go ahead and be updated, need patches, and your responsibility as a user, be it a personal user or in your enterprise, right? Your responsibility is to ensure that you are regularly patching these solutions. So if you work corporate, you're probably aware of that annoying little pop-up that happens every so often. Your IT team does it saying, hey, you need to update your machine, right? And you can probably snooze it 2-3 times. You as that user, it's your responsibility. Hey, whenever I have that time, let's go ahead and update that. And it's the same on your personal machine, right? Microsoft isn't going to go ahead and access your personal machine and say, let's update this. Same with Apple, right? They're going to suggest it to you, but you as a user have to go ahead and do this action independently and on your own there. And of course, they will give you guidance through documentation or pop-ups and what have you. Now, this is always to allow, well, fixes. There's sometimes fixes for newer, discovered, or observed vulnerabilities, right? Sometimes a 0-day happens and it only affects one person. But because of that one person, the vendors can go ahead and say, let's push a patch to everything, right? Or sometimes a 0-day doesn't even happen. It's a responsible disclosure by a security researcher, right? They go ahead and tell the company, hey, this is what I did, this is how I did it, and oftentimes they'll also be paid for it, right? So, updating and patching, it allows you to receive these fixes for any newer, disclosed, or observed vulnerabilities. And really, it protects you from those exploits, that bad actor, that hacker, right? It goes ahead and protects you from a lot of those exploits that the industry is seeing out there. So, let's just go ahead and scope, because we talked a lot about what a built-in security solution means. So let's just scope this module, right? The key emphasis, I can't unfortunately go over every single distribution, every single operating system, all variants, can't talk about Raspberry Pi or something like that. We have to be very homed in on what we're talking about here. So through the module, we'll be talking about Mac OS, but we won't be diving into a guided demo with it. Just frankly, most users have a Windows device at this point. A guided demo, just for the sake of time, we're going to be using Windows OS instead. We will be going through in that information, though, for both Mac OS and Windows OS, just through slides and various resources, and how we can go ahead and set this up best. As well, we'll be doing a demo of a VirtualBox on a Windows OS device, and doing a guided walkthrough of what all these different functionalities mean, right? And lastly, of course, just as the previous module, we're going to be providing a lab over. This includes that guided scenario. Hey, this is what you need to do and why you need to do it. And you get to go ahead and use this OVA file that is provided as well to walk through hands-on activities of Windows OS security. So let's dive in immediately and start covering these bases. So let's start with Mac OS, right? Now, before we dive into the content on this slide, the main thing is, if you've used computers for 10 plus years, or maybe you just are a old school commercial fan, right? You might remember some of the commercials that were Mac versus PC. We're going to actually pull this up here, little fun one, and you might recognize one of the actors in it. But we're just going to quickly watch it. It's just a 30-second video, so I'll go ahead and shut up and play the video here.
Hello, I'm a Mac.
And I'm a PC.
Gesundheit, you okay?
No, I'm not okay. I have that virus that's going around.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, you better stay back. This one's a doozy.
That's okay, I'll be fine.
No, do not be a hero. Last year there were 114,000 known viruses for PCs.
PCs, not Macs. So you just grab this one.
I think I got a crash.
Hey, if you feel like that'll help, good.
All right, so let's go ahead and go back to the slides here. And as you saw in that video, right, there was a bit of friendly competition, to call it that, between Apple and Windows at that time, right? This whole idea of Mac never gets viruses, Mac is so awesome, Windows has a ton of different viruses, and that was a huge selling point for Apple, right? They were able to say, well, Windows is insecure, you should use a Mac if you want to be secure. And to an extent, they were right, but not exactly for the reasons that most people would imagine, right? Now, most of the time, if you had a Mac, you were a little bit more secure at that point in time. But it wasn't because Mac had this secret sauce or something like that, right? It wasn't that they had a team that was far more superior than Microsoft was to be able to run their security department and be security researchers or anything else like that, right? The reality was, it wasn't worth the time for most bad actors to go ahead and attack Mac devices. It sounds insane, right? But you gotta remember, most bad actors at this time, back in the early 2000s, even into the 2010s, right? They really wanted the best bang for their buck. There wasn't this idea of ransomware as a service. There wasn't this idea of, these cabals of hackers or anything else like that were just extremely easy to get into and, now are funded by governments. This was very, I'd say, the Wild West of computing at this point. And with that, a lot of the payoff wasn't there for going after Mac devices, those computers, right? And the main reason for that was because, well, frankly, less people were using Mac devices. This meant that bad actors didn't want to go ahead and spend the time and potentially legal action going after Mac devices. They wanted the best bang for their buck. They wanted to go after all of these users that are using Windows all throughout the world, right? And this wasn't really anything to do with Mac being better or PC being better. It's just there was a difference in architecture that meant that you couldn't really make an attack work on both a Windows and a Mac without drastically changing how the attack was functioning here. So, some other key statistics here. Let's just dive into them and go back to the browser. So, this is still, to this day, this is not something that was information from the early 2000s or 2010. This is information from 2022, right? And in this, just quickly reading over it, we won't go into any of the studies because I don't have a subscription to Statista, but key emphasis, I think, is one, Android leads the mobile market. So again, remember, not Mac devices there. Android is still leading the global market. In the US, it's a little bit weird because there's more of a contest with Apple and Google, which is the developer of Android. Well, Android variants, I should say. But this, generally speaking, is not the case worldwide. As well, any of the tablet markets, so you may have heard of like these mobile devices, anything else like that. Tablets tend to fall into that category. But key emphasis here, and we're going to specifically zoom in, the Windows OS remains that top desktop OS. And it's not something of, hey, well, it's just slightly beating out. No, it's 70% worldwide, right? Global PC operating system market, 70% are Windows. So again, remember, the key thing on this is that Windows are still a better bang for the buck for attackers. However, the architecture now is a little bit more similar, and so it's easier for bad actors to go ahead and say, let's just attack both. There's no big deal. So let's go back to the slideshow here. So again, part of the appeal is how the mobile market is with tablets, phones holding a significant, albeit still different share, and those tend to be a lot easier to go ahead and, well, now attack as well, because now attackers can say, let's just go after everything. And that's in part due to new sophistication of knowledge and technology, and in part because architecture has become, operating system architecture, I should say, has become a bit more similar. It's still different, but it's a little bit more similar than what it was. One other key thing, though, is that doesn't mean that Mac OS is just, this terrible thing, you shouldn't ever use it, right? Mac OS actually has generally good built-in security. I would even argue it's probably a little bit better than Windows still, but overall, it's got a good amount of built-in security that really is prominent and right out of the box. So let's just pop over to their page. And on this page here, we're going to see security built right in. And one key thing as we scroll down, right, we're going to start seeing these weird sort of indications, like safely run apps like never before. Okay, not too bad there, right? Your data, your rules. Well, hold on. What does that have to do with a built-in solution, right? Key thing, security doesn't always mean something like an antivirus or protecting your files or something like that from malware or hackers or ransomware or something, right? Security also means privacy. It means making sure that your data is retaining its integrity. It's making sure that it's retaining its confidentiality. If you're a cybersecurity nerd, you probably know, hey, wait, Forrest, isn't that the CIA triad? And the answer is yes, it is. Security is all based around these pillars of confidentiality, integrity, availability, and so many other pillars. You know, it's the main thing of security is not just this one size fits all bucket here. But key emphasis on this, right? Mac has done phenomenal with this. They've done such a great job with their security. You can see it with their safe browsing. One of the other things that I personally enjoy is their, let's see if I can find it, their password protection, right? I think I passed it. There we go. Yep. So their password protection here, right? This is something that is pretty awesome that you can go ahead and now, just out of the box again, secure your files or your notes with a password. So, again, Mac has done pretty good about that. So let's go back to the slideshow here. And let's talk about one other key tenet that Mac OS has really been pushing and actually, in my opinion, pushed Windows operating systems to really go after, is this idea of secure boot, right? So secure boot doesn't mean that you're wearing a really cool and fancy boot or anything like that. It's a term we're going to start hearing from both Mac OS and Windows at this point in time. And essentially what it means is an idea that's actually echoed in application security is to shift left, right? Essentially what that means is instead of focusing at that file is able to be exploited and so the operating system is compromised, right? Well, the idea is let's start the security instead of at the file level. Let's go left and begin to, well, start at the operating system level. With this, it means that the boot process is protected from malware infection, beginning in the hardware as opposed to on the software there. So we're going to go again back to the browser. And this is again all on Apple's website here. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward with it. But on this tab, you know, it goes over the idea of how Secure Boot is designed on these Mac OS devices to help only allow good code from Apple, right? It's basically saying, hey, if Apple didn't make this and if I don't know about it, it's not good. That way an attacker can't go ahead and inject an attack at the boot up process. Now, key caveat there, unless it's a 0-day that no one knows about and no one knows how they're exploiting it. As well, there are some capabilities that could happen, but generally speaking, whenever you're programming something at the hardware level, you really have to have a sophisticated attacker going after you at that point. So let's just go back to the slideshow real quick and we'll bounce back to the browser in just a moment. So we've covered all three of these tenets so far, the Mac OS and security having a complicated history. Mac OS generally has good built-in security, secure boot, and now we're going to talk about the 3 layers of defense regarding malware that Apple tends to really tout and give themselves a high five on, for good reason. So let's go ahead, go back to the browser here. And so there's 3 layers generally in a Mac OS security approach based on malware, right? There's prevention, and that's at the launch of the malware. Let's actually zoom in so it's easier to see. So there's that prevention capability, right? That's at the launch of malware, execution of it, what have you. And we see where it's called out, App Store, Gatekeeper, combined with notarization. Okay. We can see that it blocks the malware from running on customer systems. Cool story. Again, Gatekeeper, notarization, X Protect. and that remediation malware, right? And again, Xprotect. It goes into depth about exactly what each little section does. For the sake of time, we won't cover and read verbatim, but generally speaking, the key thing to understand is all of these various components, App Store or Gatekeeper, Gatekeeper notarization, and Xprotect, all of these work together hand in hand. Again, that's the idea of that defense in depth approach, right? Um, that's really just having that multifaceted, different core components working alongside one another. So let's go ahead and return back to the slideshow. And from here, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. So in this, I did want to provide just an example of what the security and privacy settings tend to look like for macOS devices. These might vary a little bit. Just this was based on what I was able to find on the web, but generally speaking, you'll see that this is the general tab highlighted and as well the file vault, which is the disk encryption tab highlighted. We're going to be going into disk encryption in another module, but for the sake of it, just understand right now it's a security feature. So moving on, let's start talking about Windows OS security. So with Windows OS security, let's just immediately get this out of the way, right? In the history of Windows operating systems, security really wasn't that great. It was pretty poor out of the box, and that's actually why in that commercial we watched earlier, it was so easy of a job for Apple to go after Windows and say, we don't get viruses like you do. That's not infecting us. And multiple people all over the globe, they'd fall for phishing attacks, get their computers compromised, so on and so forth. And additionally, there was an opportunity for many viruses that might occur from a non-technical savvy user just downloading a file that they thought was safe. Again, it was the Wild West back then. But, key thing to understand is that as Windows OSs are still 70% as of 2022 of the global operating systems, they're a massive target. And this is a huge target on Windows back there for any bad actors that want to go ahead and even just start up with hacking in the first place. And this commonly means that, attackers will go over exploit, common exploits, see what is available because, well, people don't patch. That's just the reality of it, right? Microsoft can tell you, hey, you need to patch. This is a critical sort of thing. But if you don't, it's on you. And bad actors, they don't care. They'll say, well, we already have a script for this. May as well just run it and see what's out there. And so they tend to go after anybody with a Windows OS. Now, as well, one key note is that regardless if it's intended to be an attack for an enterprise, your computer is still a target. If it's for an enterprise, for personal, anything else like that. There are so many attacks that happen to companies and with such company assets. But you, who might not be involved with that company whatsoever, are still a target of this. Why? Well, if they compromise your machine, that's another node, essentially another asset that they can use as a launching point to be a bot, maybe used for a DDoS, a distributed denial of service attack, or even just used to be able to mask where they're actually connecting from. They might connect from your PC instead. So you're still a target. That's the main thing that you need to understand. And you can still be caught up in these enterprise-wide attacks that you have nothing to do with the enterprise on. Now, as well, there's different options, there's different configurations. Again, we're talking a lot about personal. There's this difference of personal and enterprise. There's literally different licenses that that Microsoft sells for this. But overall, the settings may be used based on what type of the computer and what license is applied. And typically, even for enterprises, there are different levels, right, of what these licenses do and entail you to. But for the scope of this module, we're just going to be talking about personal, aka those consumer devices. And one last thing, as well, generally, a new Windows computer, in this modern day, it will provide most of the security that is needed by a user by default, really. You might want to still turn on some specific settings or maybe even turn them off. But for most, again, that 90% population, it's going to be fine. Now, and that might sound weird with all of these other pillars really involved with it, but Windows has come leaps and bounds over the last 10 years, even 5 years. They've invested heavily into their security stack just out of the box, and they're doing this due diligence now. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide and start going over a little bit of those due diligence items that we're referring to. So we have a sample of what Windows security commonly looks like, and this is some of the settings. We're going to go into depth over each of these in the guided demo, actually. So without further ado, it is officially time for our demo, so let's go ahead and kick that up. All right, so we have our virtual machine ready to go, so I'm just going to switch over here, and we'll log in if I remember it off the top of my head, and I think I do. All right, so we are now in. It's just going to give this message because I'm using a trial license. So we'll close this out, or I'm sorry, an enterprise evaluation license. So we're going to close this out. And first what we're going to do is we're going to open up a Windows security settings tab. So we can first just open this. And I just hit the Windows key to pull up the start menu. And what we're going to do is go to settings. And we're now going to go to, let's go to, tell you what, let's go with update and security here, and then we're going to go into Windows security. Now as well, I'm just going to click on open Windows security, and this is kind of a bit of a longer way to get there, but hey, we got there in the end. So immediately, as you can see, there's going to be a lot of different options that we can do, right? This isn't even all of them, but there you can see that there's 6 and now 7. So one key thing you might see already, first, there are little hazard signs everywhere. And rightfully so, right? Microsoft wants to go ahead and protect us. Now, do they do it in the right way? Up for debate. Who knows, right? But they do want to try to go ahead and protect us from what they understand. You can see we immediately have some recommendations right here. Let's just talk through each one of these. So we can see right here, set up OneDrive. Now, Microsoft asks us to go ahead and do this. So they recommend it. And the main reason behind it is it's beneficial because it allows for your files, folders, and whatever other information to be stored on Microsoft's cloud. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to collect your data, go through it, figure out everything on it, right? This is more so for your sake because this is essentially a free backup. So if this machine, you know, your computer here, if it ever just dies, it won't start up, or maybe it's taken over, you still have access into these files and information here. As well, I'm pretty sure it's every user with a Microsoft account gets up to 5 gigabytes of space free as of 2023. If you have a Office 365 subscription, I believe it's 1 terabyte that you get free. Or, I'm sorry, not free, but with your subscription. We can see now here, account protection. So, you know, with Microsoft, the account protections are essentially that sign-in for Microsoft, right? Whenever we saw that with the previous demo, it wanted us to go ahead and have a sign-in with Microsoft. Now, although that seems annoying, that's for good reason, right? If you go ahead and have that, that means you are able to proceed to get security benefits and other benefits like recovery and ease of access from other machines. Now as well, let's just go to the last little one here. So we see app and browser control. The setting to block potentially unwanted apps is turned off. Your device may be vulnerable. And it wants us to turn this on. Essentially what that's saying is that the app and browser control does not have the reputation-based protection enabled out of the box. We'll be going over this more in depth as we go through each section. But let's go through each section actually. What does it all mean? So we'll start on virus and threat protection. So we can see immediately we can do a quick scan. Why we might want to do that? Well, we might only just want to say what's changed since the last scan, right? Might be I don't know, a week-old machine and we want to do a quick scan, what have you there, right? But essentially, this just goes ahead and instead of saying, let me do a 2-3 hour long scan, let me do a quick one, see what's going on your computer. We can go ahead and go into the scan options. So just quickly on this, we can actually change this from quick scan. We can say full scan, do a custom scan. We can do a Microsoft Defender offline scan as well. So in this, again, we talk about quick scan. The full scan, opposite of the quick scan, right? It just goes ahead and scans the entire machine. A custom scan, maybe you have a very sensitive folder that you should never have anything modified in. You know, whatever is in there is the only thing that should ever be in there. You might want to say, let me do a custom scan to make sure we're all good still. As well, then there's that Microsoft Defender offline scan. This is specifically for that offline sort of setup, so maybe you're in airplane mode, anything else like that. So typically this goes ahead and helps remove your potential malware using those threat definitions. Again, that content package upgrade, right? Just emphasis, it does restart your device, so just be prepared for that. So just coming back up here, we then have allowed threats. What is this? Well, essentially that's what you're saying is allowed. Folks, Microsoft, your enterprise systems, anything else like that is not going to get it right 100% of the time. So sometimes you will have to go ahead and allow what they deem as a threat onto your device so that way it can go ahead and run. In the lab, you're actually going to be doing this. Then we have the protection history, right? So that basically tells us exactly what has happened based on this module of virus and threat protection. So you can see in here some of the suggestions we talked about, but as well some of the activity just based on some stuff that I've been doing in the background here. So let's go ahead and back on up here, and we'll do one more backup. Sorry, 2 more, 3 more. There we go. Okay. And actually, sorry, it was 2 more. So we're going to go ahead and go into the virus and threat protection updates, talk about this a little bit. So, you know, we can see right here, it's that real-time protection, you know, and essentially it's getting that security intelligence pretty frequently. You can see on this one, last update, 8.16. I can click on check for updates, so on and so forth. As well, let's talk about the virus and threat protection settings here. So just clicking into this, very quickly just talking about it. So there are various settings we can do. So real-time protection, again, that's really locating and stopping that malware at the installation or run. Why we would ever want to disable it, ideally you wouldn't unless you're maybe a developer, your files are getting hit by Microsoft, right? Whatever else it may be. Cloud delivered protection, so again, that's that faster protection. It's basically connecting to Microsoft's cloud. So if you're a network nerd, you might be seeing traffic flowing from your computer to Microsoft, even though you don't understand why, because you turned off all of those location tracking aspects on it. Automatic sample submission. As it sounds, it's submitting the sample to Microsoft whenever it gets pinged as a possible threat, right? That way they can go ahead and apply that to the larger scale content package and so on and so forth. Personally, I'm a big fan of just having it on because that goes ahead and lets, well, the community grow. Tamper protection, so essentially that means that you wouldn't be able to have other users or even other softwares tamper with the security functionality of Windows Security. Controlled folders, very self-explanatory. It's protecting the files, folders, memory areas from those unauthorized changes, so you can basically say who is or isn't allowed to do that, including software. Exclusions, so again, exclusions that won't scan stuff, so maybe you know that you have a safe environment, or maybe you don't care if you download stuff in your downloads, right? You can add that to your exclusion list and say, don't ever look in the downloads. And it won't. As well, we have notifications. So basically, as it sounds, it'll send you that little notification. It'll be in the bottom right of your screen saying, hey, we picked up a threat. So just good for your awareness on it. Let's go back. And last little note on this one. We're not going to talk about it way too much in this module, but ransomware protection, set up OneDrive for file recovery options in case of a ransomware attack. We're going to be talking about disk encryption in another module here. And typically Microsoft also has an offer for BitLocker. This is, again, that comprehensive complementary solution though, right? I'm definitely a big fan of turn it on, set up OneDrive so that way your stuff is backed up, because it's not even a security concern at that point. If your computer dies and you can't recover it, you lose everything. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. And we'll go to account protection. So in this, again, we have that idea of the Microsoft account. Again, this is an actual beneficial thing to you. It's essentially that way your account has additional security control, such as, impossible travels. Microsoft is able to say, hey, Forrest, you were just in Florida and now you're in Canada in 1 minute? What's going on? Right? Or other controls applied around it. Now, that's mostly an enterprise level aspect of that impossible traveler, but it goes ahead and still flags a little alert that might be beneficial for you as a user to go ahead and say, hey, it's fine. As well, let's talk about Windows Hello. So you can see Windows Hello is not set up, and we can't actually use that without having a Microsoft account. So Windows Hello is pretty beneficial. It has essentially 3 different flavors to it right now. It's the Windows Hello face, it's the Windows Hello pin, and the Windows Hello biometric that you can set up. Again, we'll just click on this, and you can see Hello face, fingerprint, and pin. Again, those do require a Microsoft account, and you can see that not all of these, including the fingerprint and the face, are not available to our machines, right? So it does depend on your hardware and your software. Just going back. Sorry, went one too far. Dynamic lock. So, dynamic lock, it's actually a pretty beneficial feature. If you have a phone, you can pair that phone over Bluetooth to this computer, and essentially if you decide, hey, I'm going to go ahead and, pop out to the store, or anything like that, right? Well, whenever the computer doesn't have the connectivity based on dynamic lock to your phone, it'll automatically lock the machine. This is beneficial if you have family, this is beneficial if you're in an enterprise, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and back on out and go to firewall and network protection here. So in this, you're going to see there's 3 main buckets immediately that we see. There's the domain network, and that's commonly for workplaces. There's no harm in having it on, really. Having the firewall on, I should say, even if you're not part of a domain. I personally encourage having all 3 of these always on, regardless. But if you are part of a domain, typically the IT team will be controlling this, right? At least on the domain network. So let's talk about private network. This is typically the most common. So your home network, your ISP, everything like that. Something we're a bit more lean on our security for, because it's our home network, right? So maybe we would allow our devices to be discoverable by other devices on the network. And then there's public networks, right? These are like the local coffee shops, those Starbucks, or maybe the public transit for the metro, right? And these tend to be where you don't want your device to be discoverable on. And the key emphasis on this isn't where you define and say, my network is a public network or anything else like that, right? That's actually in the network settings, so on and so forth, but that's really out of the scope of what this module is intended for, right? One other key call out, I would say, is the host-based firewall components, like allowing an app through the firewall, right? That's a huge thing that you might need to do. If you ever were a gamer, I know I personally was, I always had to allow Warcraft 3 through the Windows firewall and make sure that the ports were also allowed through. So you've likely had to go in there previously. 2 other honorable mentions on it. There's the firewall notification settings. So again, just getting notified about stuff. And then as well to the restore firewalls to defaults. Both of these are really out of scope for what we're talking about in this lecture, but just be aware they are there. All right, so let's go to the next bucket here, this app and browser control. So again, you're going to see a few different settings. So reputation-based protection is the first one. So by default, this is disabled. Now, why do you think Microsoft would say, we'll disable it? Key emphasis. This is based around potentially unwanted, right? That's not Microsoft saying, hey, this is 100% unwanted. This is something that might be potentially unwanted. That can be from various applications, files, and websites. Now, what that essentially means is that we commonly refer to these as PUAs, potentially unwanted applications, or PUPs, potentially unwanted programs. And typically, that goes ahead and means, well, you probably don't want this. And in most enterprises, we don't, right? We want to have a very stringent, very clean environment. But for personal computing, typically, it's on you. If you want it, absolutely. If it's not malware, at least, right? So let's go ahead and just dive into the reputation-based protection settings. So you're going to see here, you can go ahead and check apps and files from the web. Really great for avoiding downloading something malicious from the web. If you ever downloaded .mp3 files from like Napster or anything else like that in the early days, probably a good thing. Or LimeWire. Yes, LimeWire was the worst there, but probably a good setting to have, right? There is Smart Screen. So essentially what that means is that it complements that above setting. It prevents malicious sites from even being opened on Edge. One key emphasis, this is only on Edge. So that's a browser that Microsoft has. It replaced Internet Explorer. This does not control other developers like Google or Firefox or Mozilla that develop Firefox. So just key emphasis, that's only Edge. We then have the potentially unwanted app blocking. So again, that's where it's recommending we turn that on. This is really based around your preference. Personally, I would say if you are not a power user, if you're not downloading a ton of different games, a ton of different music, anything else like that from various small developers or musicians, I would say turn this on, right? It's always good to just have that extra layer of security. And worst case, you can go ahead and exclude it and still get that file or anything else that you were trying to. And then lastly, of course, that Smart Screen for Microsoft Store apps. That's very similar to a control for any of like the mobile app stores. So typically if you're downloading something from the Apple App Store on your iPhone, it has a very similar functionality behind this. It basically means, hey, check the web content, right? So let's go ahead and go on back here. All right, and let's talk about exploit protection here. So we're going to just go immediately into the exploit protection settings here, but just quick note, out of the box, your device is already set up with it. Remember, out of the box security. So just briefly going over this. This is pretty advanced sort of stuff, and an in-depth dive into each of these settings are really outside of the scope of the module. Again, this is beginner level, so we do just want to make sure you're aware of it, but ideally, unless you are at the very minimum intermediary with tech, please don't mess around with this stuff. Very same with the program settings, so on this is where you can explicitly allow something to run. So, maybe you turned on that potentially unwanted program stuff, right? You might want to go in here and say, allow me to run warcraft3.exe or something like that, right? So just, again, awareness, and probably outside of the scope for 90% of the people that will be working with something like this. All right, so let's go ahead and go back. And now we're going to go to device security. This one's pretty straightforward. Again, these are pretty advanced features. I would not encourage going over all of these, I would not encourage messing around with all of these different things. As you can see, core isolation details, we're getting into the core aspect on it, right? You can have memory and integrity and so forth. One honorable call out I do want to say is Secure Boot. We talked about that with Mac OS. Now, Windows has been adopting Secure Boot heavily now. With their newest operating system, Windows 11, it actually requires Secure Boot to upgrade from a Windows 10 to a Windows 11 device. Um, Only issue, not all hardware is capable of doing Secure Boot. So you might not be able to actually upgrade if you have a Windows 10 to a Windows 11 if your hardware, not anything you can download, but something you'd have to replace, does not support Secure Boot. But again, it's that idea shifting left at the hardware level. All right, so let's go back here, go to the device performance and health. Now, again, as I kind of alluded to, security it has three main pillars typically, at least in terms of this one, is the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability. Device performance and health, those are still important, and even though it might seem odd that it's in security, you got to remember that tenet, availability. It's a key component of security as well. This is basically just saying the health of the device, so you can see, storage capacity, no issues. Apps and software, no issues. Windows Time Service, no issues. Okay, cool story. So good to always just pop in here every so often, make sure your device is healthy. And then lastly, family options. So these are typically settings that are managed through Microsoft 365 Family Safety, and really they're outside of the scope of this course. Just good to be aware that this does exist. All right, so in this we went ahead and covered all of these various different elements of out of the box what Windows Security offers. So let's go ahead and return back to the slideshow here. And proceed. So overall, that's the heavy duty content here. And what we're going to be talking about now is, well, what we're going to ask you to do. So one key thing, again, we're going to keep on hammering this home. Do not conduct these labs on your personal computer. Use VirtualBox for this. And that VM environment, it's preset in the OVA files. You can do a new evaluation file if you want to, no big deal. But for the purposes of this lab, they are preset in these OVA files as well. But again, this is this independent lab activity. It's conducted at home. That way you can go ahead and get that hands-on experience. Whoop, sorry on that. So again, this lab, we're going to go over a scenario. So you are trying to download a file to prove that your Windows security program is as functional as a paid-for antivirus solution. With this, you are attempting to download an evaluation file from Microsoft Security, but you can't seem to get it to download. You need to allow the file to download onto your computer, prove that it's picked up in a scan, and remove the exception created to allow it to download. Remember, we always want to clean up after ourselves here. Now, again, that measure of success is that secondary, right? That's what you need to do for that measure of success for the lab. All right, so just some very minimal disclaimers on this one. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure that labs 1 and 2 are completed for hands-on experience, right? We want to make sure that you're going to be getting this exposure, getting this information, so on and so forth. As well, please make sure your VirtualBox, it's always up to date. And as well, last key note, Alphagrad and myself, we don't take any responsibility for supporting your machine or troubleshooting VirtualBox, right? All of this material, it is at this point in time what was created. I definitely encourage communicating in the Discord, asking questions, but we cannot take responsibility and ownership for independently troubleshooting every single person's machine there. So again, please definitely use the Alphagrad Discord. Ask any questions, discussions, comments, concerns about this. I'm decently active in there, so please definitely feel free to reach out or even pop by and say hi. So, last little thing, upcoming session, right? We are going to start talking about the encryption settings that are available in Windows and Mac OS and why you might need to use these, right? These are typically things that most users don't know about, but they're extremely important and help protect you against things like ransomware. So, overall, very exciting. Really appreciate y'all tuning in for this one. It was a great pleasure to put this together, to be able to demo it. And like I said, if you have any questions about it, feel free to ping me in the Alphagrad Discord. As well, feel free to ping the administrator teams of Alphagrad, asking them, hey, what might be going on, so on and so forth. On that, folks, enjoy the rest of your time. Please definitely go ahead and leverage the lab opportunity, and I'll be seeing you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.